learning to read in the early years in school is actually really public.
Right.
And it's really hard.
If you think you're not good at it, it's really hard to motivate yourself, especially publicly, to do something that's going to expose your lack of ability.
If they can't read, then they can't access English, but they also can't access the rest of the curriculum. So it comes into everything. Yeah, absolutely.
My kind of overall take on the Matthew effect, most important, most sobering, but most exciting concept in education.
I like that. And so in the schools where I worked, for example, in reception, that would be all we asked the parents to do at home was reading with their children or listening to their children read.
For brilliant CPD that is inspiring, illuminating and impactful? Well, Inner Drive's training is evidence-informed, engaging and makes a real difference. Whether it is in person at your training days or online through our Teachers CPD Academy, Inner Drive is transforming how schools and colleges do professional development. Email us at info@innerdrive.co.uk to take your staff training to the next level.
Hello and welcome to Inner Drive's Science of Learning podcast with me, Bradley Bush. We are here today to discuss the latest and greatest cognitive science and educational studies because we believe there is gold in the research, and if made accessible and put in hands of the right people, i.e. you, our lovely listener, it can be transformational in the lives of students. In each episode, we'll talk about 3 studies. Some are seminal, some are recent, all of them are illuminating. When we uncover a key cognitive science principle, you will hear the principle ping. And when we discuss the nuance of application, you will hear the nuanced noise, which today sounds like this. Today, we are talking all things reading, and I'm joined by the one and only Caroline Spencer. Caroline is a former primary head teacher and is now head of primary here at Inner Drive. Caroline, welcome to the pod.
Thanks very much, Brad.
You happy with my intro there?
Love it.
So I'm not going to say I made a choice 3 months ago about whether to learn the guitar, learn how to bake bread, or practice that introduction a million times. But I made my choice and I think it was worth it.
It's fabulous.
Thanks very much. So let's dive straight in to our first study. We're talking all things reading. And the first study that I thought I'd bring to the table, it's quite a famous, quite an iconic study. It's known as the Matthew effect paper.
Right.
So by a researcher, Stanovich, in 1986. It's called the Matthew effect because named after the famous passage in the Bible that basically says the rich get richer. And the theory goes that the same is true for like reading and vocabulary. So essentially, students who are at an early age good at reading tend to improve at a much faster rate, whereas those who early struggle with reading may look to avoid it, and as such, the gap essentially just gets wider and wider between these two groups.
Right.
So I've got the technical quote from the study that really explains the Matthew effect. I was thinking basically, how can I explain it? I thought I can't do it better than the researcher. So this is their quote to explain the Matthew effect. They say, the very children who are reading well and have good vocabularies will read more. They'll learn more word meanings and hence read even better. Children with inadequate vocabularies, who read slowly and without enjoyment, they'll read less and as a result have slower development of vocabulary knowledge, which further inhibits further growth in reading ability.
Right.
So that's the reading effect. And I think you see it play out quite a lot and quite starkly in schools. Some of our listeners may be familiar with the famous graph that's associated with the Matthew effect. Interestingly enough, that graph actually doesn't appear in the study at all.
Oh, right, okay.
Which is quite cool, I think, in a way of like, it's not data, it's a visual representation. And obviously we're in Inner Drive, we're quite big on visually representing research. So I think that's quite a nice one. And I thought it was quite interesting, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts and experience on this in terms of why this Matthew effect is present. So essentially, why do people who at an early stage show promise in reading, it's like a hockey stick, why do they improve at a much faster rate than those who don't? Here's what the researcher theorized, their kind of hypothesis as to why that might happen. So they list 4 potential things that might be at play individually or combined.
Okay.
So one, they said, so those who have a good interest and ability in reading early, they may choose friends who read.
Right.
Because as friends, we tend to socialise with people who like doing the same sort of things that we like doing. I've definitely experienced this with some of my family members, is when you're at the last minute thinking about what to buy them as a birthday gift, your first thought is like, what do they like? What are they good at? And so they might be more likely to be bought books as gifts. Parents, I speak as myself as a parent here, we're always scrambling about how do I best support my child's potential and their hobbies and their interests. And therefore the research was saying, if we see our children have an interest in reading, it becomes kind of like the cycle where we might then encourage them to do more reading so they get better at it and so they like it more. And the last one, which I thought was really interesting, and the reason I think this is interesting is because bear in mind this paper was in 1986. They were saying students who show an early interest in reading might be more likely to choose reading over digital devices.
Oh, wow, right.
And so I'm assuming in 1986 they were mainly talking about like TV and radio, but I think now in an age of mobile phones that becomes even more relevant, right? So those are the 4 reasons. So it's choosing friends who read, getting books as gifts, parents encouraging further reading, and choosing reading over digital devices. How does that kind of chime with your experiences, either as an educator, from what you've read in the research, or indeed as a parent who wants their child to read as much as possible?
So I'd say definitely. In terms of in the classroom, you certainly see children talking about the books that they've read and socialising with people. Sometimes you even see them at playtime, sitting and reading together. I've even seen that on play dates with my own daughter. So I think as you were talking, I was thinking about this idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So quite early on, they see themselves as a reader, perceive themselves to be a reader. And so the people around them treat them as a reader. And I was thinking as well about this kind of relationship between motivation and success that I know you and I have talked about quite a lot in terms of reading. So children who do find it easier early on and feel that they're making progress and they're successful as a reader are perhaps going to be more motivated to read. So I find the motivation thing really interesting because I think for years I definitely bought into the belief of like, if you want someone to be successful, I need to increase their motivation to do that thing. And I think there is, to an extent, a large bit of truth in that. But you can see if people, I think the reverse is also true, right? So people tend to be more motivated to do stuff that they're good at. And so especially when it comes to reading, like if you think you're not good at it, it's really hard to motivate yourself, especially publicly, to do something that's going to expose your lack of ability. And that's such a good point, because learning to read in the early years in school is actually really public. And it's really hard, that kind of process of learning how to decode words and beginning to access books is really tricky. And in the younger years in primary school, you've got what is not intentionally but quite public banding of books and that sort of thing. So even if it's managed very well and very sensitively, they all know what level everybody's on. And that's kind of race to be on free readers, which I remember my daughter going through as well. So it's a good reminder that it is a very hard process, learning to read. And in the classroom, it can be quite public. Absolutely. And so how do we either take advantage of this Matthew effect or how do we break the cycle, essentially? According to the researchers, so they give 2 suggestions. I'm going to see what you think about both. So the first suggestion they say is they go of their 2-prong attack. One is identify early, remedy early, and focus on phonological awareness. Absolutely.
And then they say the second one is to break the cycle later on. So if you haven't been able to remedy it early, to break the cycle later on, they really emphasise reading practice.
Lovely.
So what kind of, I guess, comes to mind when you kind of hear either of those 2 approaches?
I totally agree. So early intervention is key, and I'd like to think that's something that we've got better and better at in schools. So identifying early and putting in place interventions. So you talked about building phonological awareness. That's really crucial. That needs to happen in order for them to then be able to decode. And obviously we're working on their comprehension as well. Just to pick up on kind of in the early years as well, I think it's important not to forget the impact of reading for pleasure, because children can experience success reading picture books for pleasure and talking about those, even if they're still struggling in terms of the curricular reading, with the decoding and all of that sort of thing. But I also completely agree with the really useful reminder of the importance of reading aloud and reading practice in the later years. And I think that can easily be forgotten with the very best intentions, because there's so much to cover in the old years in primary school.
Yeah, and that is the thing, isn't it? I guess is like, if you feel under pressure to do curriculum coverage essentially and just get through it, and that pressure can be really real and tangible. People tell us that all the time. This is quite time consuming, but also this, I guess, is fundamental. Yeah, to be able to access the full range.
If they can't read, then they can't access English, but they also can't access the rest of the curriculum. So it comes into everything. Yeah, absolutely.
So let me kind of wrap up this study with one more quote. Yeah. And I'm going to do the thing that they say you should never do. Okay. I'm going to quote myself.
Fabulous.
Yeah, plays to my ego. Here's kind of my reflection on the Matthew effect. Right. I think the Matthew effect is the most important, the most sobering, and the most exciting concept in education. Right. So I'm going to talk through each three. Yeah. So I think it's the most important because pretty much you summed it up perfectly. Reading unlocks everything and allows you to access a whole range of learning, and it's foundational. So like there's arguably nothing more important than what we do in education than helping children learn to read. Absolutely. So for me, anything that talks about why you get huge disparities in some students, therefore becomes one of the most important things. I think it's the most sobering because it kind of highlights that unless we do something about it, early differences can make huge impact later on. Yeah. And people can go down two very different paths. It's kind of like forks in the road that start as not much of a difference early on, but based on what gets encouraged, based on what gets supported, or, you know, that's what they're interested in, or they show good potential for it, they go down very different paths to other students. So it's quite sobering to think, oh gosh, like one small like early difference early on can take you down a very different educational path. Yeah. It's quite scary, I think that. But the reason I think it might be the most exciting concept is it kind of goes, if we get the early years right, and if we can make just a few small changes, that the impact, like the ripple effect, can be so big and it can knock people onto a different course that actually it shows us a good template of what we can do moving forward. Yeah,
huge opportunities to close that gap. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's my kind of overall take on the Matthew effect. Most important, most sobering, but most exciting concept in education.
I like that.
Thanks. So let's move on to the next study. And this is one I know that you really wanted to talk about. Yeah. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So this was a study. It's called When Children Are Not Read To at Home, the Million Word Gap, and that's by Logan et al. In 2019. I really liked this study. We'll come to the methodology in a minute, which was a little bit different. Yeah. But I liked their aim, which was to try and kind of identify potential differences in the heard vocabulary in children by the time they turn 5. So we're thinking about when children arrive to us in school, what might the differences be in so heard vocabulary, the number of words that they have heard. Yeah. And we know that children's vocabulary then feeds into reading achievement. And so if I talk about the methodology now, they calculated expected differences. So it's important to be really clear that they were looking at general patterns. So they weren't sort of following children around, but I liked the way that they did it. So they took some data from a nationally representative study of childhood in the States. And as part of the study, the parents and caregivers reported the frequency that they read to their children at home. And so that was their starting point. They found that 23% of those caregivers reported never reading to their children.
Never reading?
Yes, right. Which I found interesting.
That's a big number.
It's a really big number. So they would consider these children to experience vocabulary, heard vocabulary more incidentally. Right. So they're not taking part in what they call shared book reading sessions at home. And they then looked at how many words a child might hear in a typical shared reading session. And again, this was looking for indications. So they looked at the kind of, I think it was the 100 most circulated board books and picture books from a public library. And then they found the average number of words in each of those books. And so then they started doing some calculations. And so when they compared the number of words that those children who are never read to might have heard incidentally, compared with children who are read to daily, they found that they would likely have heard around 300,000 words fewer than the children who are read to daily. So really quite a stark difference.
Yeah.
One of the important things to note is that they didn't have any information on how many books children were read to in each session, so they were quite conservative in their estimates. What they then kind of built on was to think about literacy-rich homes. So literacy-rich homes would be where children have several books a day read to them, which again is quite common. I think board books, you can get through them quite quickly. And if your child wants a long story time, you can easily get through more. So when they were looking at the difference between children never read to and these children from what they called literacy-rich homes, the difference was more like 1.4 million words. So a really good indication, at pains to say it was an indication, but I think a really useful indication of the potential gaps in children's heard vocabulary by the time they reach us in school.
Right. I have so many questions.
All right. Okay.
So I guess my first question is, they definitely did it sounds like a, not back of a cigarette packet calculation, but they did a guess.
Yes.
In terms of what we should read into those numbers, I guess my question is like, how accurate are those numbers based on your reading of that methodology?
Yeah.
But also, how much should we actually care about the actual number? Or is it just that it gives us an indication of difference, essentially? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's the whole point. If I go back to, because I got a little bit lost in the methodology, asking lots of questions as I was reading it. And actually then when you take a step back, the point they're trying to make is, what might this difference be? Yeah. And do we even know that there might be a difference? Right. And then what's the implications of that? And I think that in itself is really useful. Yeah. It's a really useful reminder to educators that there will be children sitting in your same class of 30, roughly the same age, who may have huge differences in what they understand and what they can access. So I think that's the point, and I'm kind of supportive of that. Right.
And so I don't know if I'm sometimes guilty of oversimplifying it, but when I read stuff like that, I go to, I don't really care if the difference is 300,000 words or 400,000 words. Yeah. What I really take from that is there's a really big difference. And as a result, we need to really put at the forefront of our teaching and learning that they're not blank slates when they get to us. Exactly. Exactly what the difference level is kind of almost irrelevant for me in terms of the exact number of words they may have heard. Yeah. Because the numbers are so big. Any big difference is important. Yeah. Right. And as is the, almost 25% of them never deliberately being read to at home. Yeah. That was quite a surprise for me. Yeah. But actually it's probably quite common. Okay. So then my next question for you, which you kind of touched on, is this idea of like, so how it's all about how much you been read to at home. Yeah. In your experience as a primary head teacher, and when you're talking to other head teachers at other schools as well, where should schools draw the line between what happens at school is important because that's what you can control as the head teacher to some extent, versus how much should you be going out and educating the community, educating prospective parents, even when kids arrive at school, then educating their parents around, this is what the research is saying. Is that an overstep because it happens outside of the school, or is that actually a fundamental part of what it means to like serve the community? Oh, that's a really good question. I think when it comes to reading, we know that children benefit anyway when there's good alignment between home and school. And I think it's important that if we're having conversations with parents that we're practicing what we preach at school as well. Yeah. So we're valuing reading. And so in the schools where I worked, for example, in reception, that would be all we asked the parents to do at home was reading with their children or listening to their children read.
So we're then showing that this is a priority for us. But I would share anecdotally research, like the OECD says that reading for pleasure is kind of this single biggest contributor to well-being or whatever it is. And the benefits of reading to your children. I would share that. Sometimes you're preaching to the converted because the people who are there at your talks.
So it's quite a self-selecting group. Yeah, right.
And I think it's important to do it in a non-judgmental way because we're both parents and you're not always able to get everything done in the way that you know you should.
I like what you said, like not everything. If I can do about half the
that's
things,
exactly
I'm quite happy sometimes.
So it's having conversations and being supportive, but also showing that it's a huge priority for us. And it's benefiting the children if they're aligned with that.
Okay, and so what final question for you on this study is, in your previous answer, you referred to reading to your child or getting your child to read to you. And this is something I personally wrestle with because I love reading to my children and I think they so much love me reading to them. Sometimes I worry that I'm doing all the reading and they're not doing any of the reading. And so I actually asked someone recently about this. So a shout out to Emma Turner, who we're big fans of here at Inner Drive. I basically asked her this question, like, should I worry about that I'm doing most of the reading? And the way she described to me, it was quite reassuring. They didn't seem like reading to your child or having your child read to you is you're basically talking about the difference between like breathing in and breathing out. So like they both matter and you have to do both and they're both important, but there's still a lot of value in you reading to your child. Obviously we want them to be doing a lot of reading as well, but like having that time where you just get to bond a bit and sometimes have random conversations that aren't related to the book. It's one of the few times that you can guarantee they won't be on digital devices a bit as well. But it was just quite reassuring that actually her advice and that phrase, and also this study, there's so much value in just reading to your child as well.
Definitely, And I'm a huge advocate of little and often as well, because I think sometimes we all in busy households with a lot of competing demands, and it doesn't need to be hours and hours. A little and often approach can have a huge impact. And in the study that I read, they had this term that I really liked. They talked about shared book reading offers a lexical reservoir.
A lexical reservoir.
That
that is a beautiful
very
phrase.
Fancy term.
Yeah, I like that.
But I liked it, and it was talking about the opportunities for children to pick up on vocabulary that is just unfamiliar to them and interesting and can maybe prompt conversation. And yes, it's really important for children to read and to practice reading, but there are huge values to reading to your children as well.
Nice. Which brings us on to our third and final study of the day.
Okay.
And this is one that I know you'll be particularly interested in because you've spoken to me a lot in the past about the importance of reading for pleasure. So this study was all about reading for pleasure. It was done by Sun et al. In 2024, fairly recently. I should say I did a presentation a while ago where I said, the reference was Sun. And I had someone in the audience thinking that I was referencing the Sun newspaper as my benchmark for my quality of research. Right. So just to reassure all listeners, that's the researcher's surname. Sun. Yeah, in this one, So here's this basic setup of the study. About 10,000 students, so large scale. And early in childhood, they measured the amount they read for pleasure.
Right.
And then later, in their teenage years, they did a range of interviews, assessments and brain scans to see what can we see in these students who've read a lot for pleasure. And they found reading for pleasure was correlated with some really interesting things. So they said reading for pleasure was correlated with how well they did in cognitive tests in their teenage years. How much they read for pleasure as a child was correlated with speech development, academic achievement, and even brain structure and volume in certain areas of the brain.
Right.
It was negatively correlated with mental health problems, and it was negatively correlated with the amount of screen time. So the more someone read for pleasure, there was associated with less screen time, less mental health problems. Now, we should probably acknowledge straight off the bat, because I know there'll be some people either watching or listening who'll be screaming at us to say, these results are correlational and they're not causal. And whenever you introduce any correlational studies, you always get someone who always goes, oh, but correlation doesn't prove causation. And they are absolutely right. It doesn't. And it's really important to acknowledge that. However, right, I'm going to share with you a quote. This isn't from the study. This is one of my favorite quotes, and randomly it's from a cartoonist and an engineer, a person called Randall Munroe.
Okay.
Right. And this is their view on correlation, essentially. They say correlation doesn't imply causation, but it does waggle its eyebrow suggestively and gesture furtively while mouthing, look over there.
Great.
And I quite like that in the sense of like, yes, correlation doesn't prove causation, but also if you have a shed load of studies and they're all correlational and they're in different domains and different researchers and they all point to the same direction, it can certainly give us an indication.
Yeah.
And even if reading for pleasure doesn't cause all those things, in of itself, I think it's a really important and brilliant thing to encourage.
Absolutely.
Now, the one part I wanted to ask you about the study, I want to get your thoughts on this. So, like, they claim in the study that 12 hours a week reading for pleasure is optimal, right? Okay. And I've always been, we kind of touched on it earlier, I've always just been a bit hesitant when people start putting very specific and very round numbers on things. And I didn't really want to ask you so much what you think the optimal number is, because I don't actually believe there is an optimal number.
Yeah.
I guess the question I wanted to ask you is, if reading for pleasure is really important and doing a lot of it is clearly helpful, how do we take that knowledge and do something with it? Because if schools mandate it, if they get students to measure it, well, that doesn't sound very pleasurable.
No.
And the whole point of this is reading for pleasure. So I guess the question is, what can we do to try and get people to read for pleasure more in the way that keeps the essence of it being pleasurable at its heart?
Yeah. It's interesting to hear the 12 hours. I hadn't been aware of that. And I would proceed with caution there because obviously you need to take age and stage into account.
Yeah.
And I think whenever you set a target, people can be a bit intimidated by that or maybe give up because it doesn't seem achievable. So I said earlier that I'm a huge advocate of little and often. And in terms of working in a school, if reading is part of the fabric of the school and reading for pleasure is part of the fabric of the school, and it's the culture, then that can have a huge impact. I was thinking while you were talking as well about rewards and incentives, because I know we've spoken about that before as well. So I think, I mean, we talked earlier about motivation. So success is obviously really important, but I know there's also a lot of research on giving them choice and that sort of thing, and letting them choose what they're interested in. And I think it's a good reminder, as you said, there are so many studies out there that point to the broad-ranging and far-reaching benefits of reading for pleasure.
So can I just ask you a quick question on that then?
Yeah.
If choice is important, sometimes I think some people can be a bit, I don't even know what the word is, maybe snobbish almost about it in terms of, oh, but they're choosing not the most highbrow and challenging of texts.
Yes.
Is that okay when it comes to reading for pleasure in your mind, do you think?
Yeah, it's really hard because we can sometimes think as teachers we're doing them a disservice if we haven't made sure that they've read this range of genre. But I think we need to remember that they'll get there. And so if they're in that stage where they're still becoming a confident, competent reader, or they're not quite there yet, then choice is really important. And I can remember being a year 2 teacher with somebody wanting to read the 6th in a Beast Quest book or the Fairy series of books or whatever it was, and thinking that it was kind of my duty to push them towards something else. But actually, I really believe that familiarity helps them feel more comfortable and confident and successful. And so although I couldn't quite understand why they wanted to read, so many books in the same series, I did have to accept that that was part of becoming a reader to them.
And presumably that's what the curriculum is designed for, to have challenging texts that do expose them to a wide range of things. Whereas if we're talking about just reading for pleasure, which is essentially outside of the curriculum, that choice becomes important. And because you brought that flexibility, because you know that other stuff is covered in the pre-prepared curriculum.
Yeah, and that distinction is really important. So we're thinking about reading for pleasure as opposed to curricular reading.
Yeah.
And we would expect to have more input in terms of their curricular reading. But in terms of reading for pleasure, I think that choice is really important. I definitely see it with my own daughter. She will always go to at the minute graphic novels.
Yeah.
And I know that she might be capable of reading something that I might consider a bit more highbrow, but she's 8, and if that's what she's enjoying reading, then that's fine. And similarly, accepting that not everybody likes reading fiction, and for some children, non-fiction or magazines or things like that are actually brilliant for them.
So just on that note, I had a friend recently tell me that they said the best thing they did to get their child reading for pleasure was they subscribed to the Beano.
Yeah,
because just it arriving in the post and addressed to them,
lovely.
was a sense of excitement, and it just set the tone really nicely. Now, the strategy that always stuck in my mind, that when I interviewed a researcher on this, they said the 2 things they thought were really good was, one, if you model reading yourself. So if a child sees their parent reading for pleasure, then because we know in their eyes, like with the centre of their worlds at that young age, basically, they're going to imitate and copy. And it did kind of give me a moment to pause and kind of reflect and almost shudder, because I was thinking, my 8-year-old, he has definitely seen me on my phone more than he has seen me reading for pleasure. Like anytime I read is probably after he goes down to sleep. And so in terms of just what he's been exposed to, in terms of me modelling good behaviours, it's quite a moment to think like, oh God, how often have they actually seen me read for pleasure? And I guess hand in hand in that is just talking about books. So just telling them about something that you read that was really interesting, asking them about their books, just making it part of the conversation is quite a cute way in, I think, in terms of creating that culture for reading for pleasure.
So, you're right. There's absolutely research out there that shows children who grow up in homes where they see their caregiver reading are more likely to read for pleasure themselves. So it's quite a big responsibility on us. But you talked about the culture, and that's really important as well. So my daughter mostly sees me reading when we're on holiday, but she also sees books on my bedside table, and we'll talk about that, and she doesn't know that I'm often too tired to read them. But they're there and I'm interested in them, and so it is talking about, you're on your phone, but it might be that you've just read a really interesting article on your phone, that you talk to them about. So talking about what they're reading, talking about what you're reading or what you have read, helps to build that culture of reading in your family. And I think that's part of what the research is showing as well.
Amazing. Caroline, I could honestly talk to you about reading all day. This has been a whistle-stop tour of 3 of the studies. Before we have to say our sad goodbyes, if anyone listening wants to get in touch, wants to talk more about this, how can people find you?
So you can check us out on our website, innerdrive.co.uk. But please do also get in touch with me if you want to talk about anything to do with literacy. That's cspencer@innerdrive.co.uk.
Amazing. And you have to come back in a few months to do the same again, and this time talk about spellings with me.
Absolutely.
Caroline, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. For everyone listening, please do let us know what you thought on this episode. Comment, like, share on social media, and above all, please subscribe. Everyone else, see you next time. Bye.
If you've enjoyed this episode and want to improve your staff's understanding of the science of learning, you'd simply love Inner Drive's training. We offer brilliant in-person workshops plus online support through the Teachers CPD Academy, trusted by thousands of teachers worldwide. Simply email us now at info@innerdrive.co.uk to take your staff's professional development to the next level.